Hello and welcome to another fully live Q&A Incident of the Month stream of Hacking with Friends. My name is Kody Kinzie. I'm a security researcher at Varonis, and today I am joined by Joe again to talk about our Incident of the Month. Joe, thank you for joining us again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Had a great time last time. I'm sure it'll be a great conversation.
Yeah, so we have been off the air for about a week now while I was on PTO, which was lovely, by the way. And I stayed up working on a bunch of cool hardware projects, of course, which I'll go over a little bit, but it's just great to see everybody in the stream again. I know we worked up to like 160 or so people like in the chat, like hanging out with us last time. So yeah, really excited to be back talking about some of the things that I haven't got to for the last couple weeks. So one of them that I wanted to shout out was Meshtastic. So we talked a little bit last time about LoRa, and that kind of led up to people being like, hey, you should try Meshtastic. And look at that, I did. So I got one of these Heltec, I believe it's called, e-paper modules, and they work really well. They allow you to connect with your phone over Bluetooth, and then this acts kind of like a LoRa kind of like router kind of thing that connects to other nodes, passes along packets, and I am able to see that it is in fact receiving and passing along packets. Although I will say, as a first time Meshtastic user, it was super easy to set up. I love the e-paper. I think it's so cool, and I was able to actually discover nodes around me almost immediately. The only problem is like none of them responded. But then again, I didn't really know what to say. So like just messaging like ASL to like every LoRa node around you, like, I don't know if that's the right way to start a conversation anymore. But it was interesting to see that anybody can get set up with these little nodes. And I got this one for about 15 bucks on AliExpress. I know they're a little bit hard to find right now. And I found that a lot of the ones available on Amazon maybe weren't so great. But if you're interested in Meshtastic, it's a really cool new technology that people have been adopting because it's become very, very cheap to use. And I know that there's been a lot of interest around it, especially in our chat. So I wanted to give everyone an update on that. I am the only Meshtastic node apparently in my area, but when I was in Los Angeles last week, I was able to connect to apparently a station in Long Beach, all the way from Koreatown, which if you've been to LA, you know that's really, really far. So very, very cool tech. I'm going to give you guys more of an update when I get a second node in, probably next week, and I can actually do some range testing, because I did try in my area and I just wasn't able to get it working with the other Meshtastic node that one of my friends set up. So that's my little piece of feedback about LoRa. I know a lot of you have been asking how useful is Meshtastic, and you know, if you have friends who are also using it, probably a lot more useful. But if you're just looking for people in your area, it might not be the easiest to set up necessarily when it comes to just finding people and starting to chat, unless you're in a dense city like I was last week. So if you guys have any other questions about Meshtastic, I really have been interested in it lately, and especially some of the systems that lay on top of it, like ATAC, like have attracted a lot of interest. So yeah, I definitely am down to talk about it more, because also I have created a couple of my own custom boards. So these may look like regular nuggets that I've showed off before, but on the back is a pair of LoRa radios that tie them together and allow them to send messages directly back and forth to each other. I can use that to pass sensor data. I can use it also to create a chat. And my friends and I have been talking about creating a DEF CON badge that essentially allows you to pair people together at the conference to kind of like solve a challenge or like do some sort of task. So DEF CON is all about collaboration, and it's pretty cool that you can use a technology like this to ensure that one badge could theoretically control all the other badges at the conference that have this receiver. So we've been kicking around ideas, and this is the first generation prototype of that idea that's going to go into testing. So if you're going to DEF CON this year, no promises, but stay tuned for some possibly interesting information about what we plan on doing this year at DEF CON, because making a badge that allows people to kind of Omegle style, possibly calling it Onuggle, I don't know, there's still ideas out there. That all sounds like a lot of fun and like something that a lot of people would probably enjoy. So yeah, looking forward to the conference season. And the next conference that's coming up is RSAC. So that's going to be in San Francisco. It's coming up like, oh my gosh, like next week, the week after. So I'm going to be there. If anybody is going to be in San Francisco for RSAC, then you can catch me at the Varonis booth. I am going to be working on a bunch of content. I'm going to be interviewing some people that are speaking at the conference for the first time. I'm going to be doing a couple of quizzes where people can come up to the booth and win prizes for answering a couple of questions right. So if you're interested in, getting some gift cards, hanging out, getting to see the crew behind Security Forward and Hacking with Friends, we're going to be there, and we would be happy to see all of you. So that's most of my updates. Oh, well, okay, except for one. So we were talking a little bit about war driving before the show. Joe, it sounds like you have quite a background with war driving. I'm wondering, could you explain it to the audience if maybe they haven't heard of it?
Yeah, really quick. Were you at DEF CON last year or the year
Sure was.
before?
We did.
Okay.
I've been there for the last of several years, and last year we did our own badge, which was Nugget Quest, which was a take on Laser Quest, where we had laser tag basically with IR badges that we were selling at Hacker Warehouse. It was super cool.
Yeah. I've been there with some of my team the past 2 years with Veronis and some years before. But yeah, maybe we'll have to arrange a Veronis get together this upcoming one then and figure something out.
Yeah, I did a presentation to the Verona's marketing team about what DEF CON was last year, and they were like, "Oh my god!" Like I had no idea. So it was cool. I think that they're definitely interested in it this year, and maybe we'll get to do some more stuff.
Yeah, we submitted some talks actually today, and some Black Hat talks as well. So we'll see what happens there. Maybe some of our team will be there in a presenter capacity too.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah, I mean, talking about war driving for a second, yeah, it's been a while, but generally when people refer to war driving, they're referring to kind of, let's say, almost, I want to say mobile hacking or mobile scanning, maybe is a better term. Usually it's the literal act of driving around with some type of hardware and software in your car or some other type of transportation where you are going around looking for, let's say, points of interest. Because I don't want to necessarily say targets, but you're looking for points of interest that might be interesting to you as a offensive security professional. I don't want to condone someone just driving around looking to hack Wi-Fi points or something, but it is something that, it's offensive security professionals will often do this when they're hired to do it for certain organizations or certain infrastructure or things like this. It's definitely not as common as it used to be, I think. But yeah, it's a pretty niche, area when it comes to the, offensive world, but pretty cool to talk about and think about.
Yeah, I love war driving. It was one of my first experiences with hacking. And also, hello everyone in the audience. We are like, this isn't Killian though. We're not all interchangeable security researchers, but it's good to see you as well, both James and Tai Kwang Gong. And everybody else in the chat. And yes, I do be looking like that every time the video for the chat starts. But yeah, so for me, war driving has always been fascinating because the original war driver, in my view anyway, was kind of like Google back when they were doing Street View. Like they drove around with their Street View cars, and they really, I mean, they're not like the OGs, but they hired one of the OGs who was interested in war driving, and he's like, stick like a wireless receiver that can slurp down these like Wi-Fi frames and geolocate them as well, and suddenly we'll have a map where all of these are. And that was like the first, as far as I know anyway, the really widespread war driving practice because they got caught. And basically people didn't know what it was. They didn't like it. And the way they were doing it, potentially, if people's traffic was unencrypted, was slurping up things like secrets, people's search history, whatever. And the fact that that data could have been present in that data set really freaked people out, So Google got hit with like a huge fine. And the researcher that they'd hired that did this, like, probably like got in probably a lot of trouble. But the point was they were able to geolocate someone's phone with a combination of both GPS and the access points around it. And that's called a GPS. And that's the foundation for why most of our phones are able to find where we are so quickly today. So war driving has like a super important impact on like your daily life with like your phone just knowing where you are. And also it has the ability to locate maybe insecure network. So as an offensive tool, if I walk through an area, I basically get a list of where all the different access points are, what the vendor is, and lots of juicy information that I could potentially use as a hacker to do something, nefarious. But then again, if I'm just like somebody who just moved to a city, I don't know where to work or whatever, I could also take the bus through the city and then go back later and look at every open Wi-Fi access point and identify places maybe that I could get a free connection if I needed it. There's lots of interesting things you can do with war driving, and that's why I love it. And my team has been working on creating like a mini war driving rig. But first, before doing that, we wanted to really get it right and be able to have something that was highly configurable and really useful for people who are experimenting with this. So tiny it is not, but this is one of the development versions of a war driving rig that I have been working on with my friends for the last like year and a half or so. And this is a version that is kind of a total back to the drawing board version that allows you to do basically infinitely reconfigurable things to store both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth information as you go around. Now, the eventual version of this is going to be, very small, but this version has been what I've been experimenting with to do basically all the things we've been able to talk about today, like talking about geolocation, talking about identifying vulnerable networks, and using microcontrollers to do the whole thing. So if you're a nerd and you're interested, this is using the ESP32S3 to kind of drive the whole show, which has Bluetooth as well and can contribute like Bluetooth signals and use its radio for that. It has an ESP8266, which is basically slurping down Wi-Fi packets and storing them on an SD card. And it has a GPS with a active antenna that is constantly receiving the position. So really cool little tool that we are working on making a mini version of, but we might end up just doing a war driving workshop at some point that just uses these boards because, they're big, they've got lots of options. If you want to go and do something cool with them, it's got all the breakouts to do it. So these were kind of an experimental, kind of intermediary board, but frankly, the more I work with it, the more I like it. So just wanted to update people on the Wi-Fi hacking front. I know I may have bragged that I am in the top 200 contributors to wiggle.net, which just goes to show that I really like war driving. But you can use your phone to do war driving as well. It's perfectly capable of doing so. And you can use the Wiggle application if you are on Android to do that and then go back through all that data and do all sorts of incredible things. So you don't need to buy anything. You don't need to build anything really to go war driving. You just need an old Android phone, honestly. So yeah, if you're interested in this topic, I have tons to say about it because it's one of my favorite things, and I've done the most research on war driving. And actually, so have you. We've got two war drivers here who have really kind of pushed it to its limits. One of the things that I worked with my friend, let's see, how would I describe that? So there's a way that you can determine whether someone's following you potentially using war driving, where if the same device pops up multiple times, you can identify, it's too far away that network or that device could be, being received from the same person within the same area. So if you notice the same wireless network popping up over and over and over, or even the stereo of a car, like a Bluetooth stereo of a vehicle that just seems to keep following you, you can actually determine if there's certain devices following you based on some of their characteristics. So lots of interesting personal research you can do as well with Bluetooth and war driving. All right, so
I think it's interesting too, because it's one of those things that really, war driving kind of spurs, it's the equivalent, right, of something just being out there and screaming here I am, here's my data, and just putting it out there for anyone to read. And it's one of those things that really helps to spur vendors and Wi-Fi router vendors and other people to improve their security, away from something that's just spitting it all out there over the air in a way that's not super protected, and evolving us and getting us better hardware, more secure software on that hardware, and really helping to protect everyone, even people who don't know anything about it, because it's just one of those things. So people freak out about Google capturing data, but at the end of the day, it's really just all these devices, we're just throwing that data out there for anyone to capture to a certain degree. So it's really a problem it's not really Google's fault this is happening, and anyone could have done it. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure that other people were doing it and being less loud about it. But we've got Leo in the chat keeping me honest. So what happened was they were running Kismet on default, which captured the full PCAPs of over-the-air traffic, when all it was supposed to have been doing was grabbing the BSSID, SSID, security type, and signal strength. So the kind of war driving we typically do records just the metadata of these wireless networks, and Google was drinking the full sauce. They were just taking everything, and they were basically just yeah, no, this could be useful later, I guess. And because they had access to all this data, potentially, you're right. Basically, people were just broadcasting this data for anybody to see. But Google was the first to have the infrastructure go around and slurp it all up in one go and make everybody realize, when this is all put together, this is actually something that could be, it's not anonymous anymore. My Wi-Fi network has an address effectively. And as soon as you turn it on nowadays, somebody's going to war drive it or contribute it. And a lot of the time, phones are war driving for Google or Apple, contributing the location of these networks to help build their location network. So, we're not the only people war driving. Big corporations are doing it all the time to improve their services, and they just see it as kind of part of what happens.
Yeah, no, it really is an intent thing. Google didn't have a malicious intent. They had a a positive intent trying to, do what they were doing, but it could have just easily been done by someone who did have a malicious intent and who was using that data in a more nefarious way. So it's, whether what they were capturing at the end of the day, it's good, improve security, improve router security, improve network security, keep pushing vendors to stay honest and improving what they're doing. So they're not, taking the baseline minimum at a security level and actually making improvements and helping make our internet and our networks more secure.
What about support for 5 gigahertz? That's a really good question. So the nerds on this channel are aware that most microcontrollers, which are what I love to talk about because they're so cheap and they can be made into these tools so easily, do not support 5 gigahertz. It's only very recently that Espressif has released some affordable 5 gigahertz microcontrollers. However, they're not really in production in the level that I have access to. Like I kind of hit things when they drop around the $5 mark. And so far, this is either in pre-production or experimental boards. It hasn't been adopted by any of the secondary board providers like Wemos that make like the D1 Mini, the S2 Mini, like all the stuff that I like using. So to answer your question, it would take a simple swap of this guy right here with the upcoming chip to add 5 gigahertz support to this board. So it is something that could be achieved for very, very cheap relatively soon. There's other mods you can make to this as well that would allow you to have broader spectrum support. I'm kind of focusing on 2.4 gigahertz right now because so many IoT devices and other things use it, and Bluetooth plus that is going to fill up this little SD card pretty quickly. It's going to get hot. So either way, I appreciate that feedback because like one of my goals definitely is to add 5 gigahertz support. And there are upcoming chips that I believe will be dropping within the next 6 months that will directly be able to do that sort of thing and make it so that you're recording really the full spectrum. Because yeah, a lot of people know that Wi-Fi kind of comes in 2 flavors now, 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. And if you're doing cool Wi-Fi hacking stuff on 2.4 gigahertz and your target moves over to 5 gigahertz, you're done playing. Like you got to go buy an alpha wireless network adapter or something. Like you got to step it up to actually like a Linux system and you're kind of done playing with the microcontrollers. So that's too bad because there's a lot of fun to be had. And hopefully within the near future, we'll be able to have some of these extremely low cost boards support 5 gigahertz as well. All right, some very good questions. Also, James, just like the NSA, hoard data, collect everything, and analyze later. Storage is cheap. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it seems like they've built a lot of value around being able to provide location data. And if you're looking for a fun project, check out Skyhook, I believe is the name of the project. It allows you to take an ESP8266 based device and broadcast the networks around Mark Zuckerberg's pool. So if you're in an area with poor GPS reception, it drops your pin in Mark Zuckerberg's pool. I just think that's funny. I've done it in like a mall a couple of times just to check to see if it works, and it does. Like a GPS will actually put you in the total wrong position, provided that those are the strongest signals. So you can have some fun with the fruits of war driving as well, just by spoofing networks that the system knows are in a specific location, like Zuck's pool. And also thank you to Stash. I'm glad you like the videos that we've been doing. I've been covering war driving for a long time. I really love it. And we've had some fantastic researchers on who have really like inspired me to dig deeper. Like Matthew Van Hoff is one of my favorite researchers. If you're looking for some great papers to read on Wi-Fi hacking, I would say he's my absolute favorite researcher, and his papers are very digestible for beginners. A lot of the stuff that I've done has been based on his research and kind of trying to take it down to the microcontroller level. So super great resource if y'all are interested. Okay, we've got a technical suggestion. Why don't we just spin the ESP8266 so fast that the Doppler effect changes the 2.4 frequency to 5 gigahertz? Okay, yeah, I think that if we achieve the right velocity, then that could work. So I will look into that. Thank you very much. Yeah. And one other question was just with the Raspberry Pi W video I did with monitor mode. I tested it and it doesn't work anymore. So there's a lot of honestly like kind of gray market Raspberry Pi 0Ws on the market right now. So that's just one thing. If you got it for really cheap off AliExpress, then that like I've seen some of that lately. But you actually do need to install the Nextmon firmware modification. At least in the older version to get that working, but it's been years. So I believe that they included it downstream. So I would just check to make sure it's real because I've seen some very cheap Raspberry Pi 0Ws lately. All right, so without further ado, Joe, I know that you have a great incident of this month. And now that we're doing this as a regular segment, I wanted to give you the floor to talk about some of the crazy stuff that you've seen in the field in your position doing forensics and incident response at Varonis.
Yeah, sure. We can jump into that a little bit. Just for anyone, who doesn't know, I lead a team here of incident response and forensic analysts at Varonis, and we help customers who find themselves in security breach situations, basically. So anytime they need help investigating or responding to a cyber threat, our team is coming in to help them do whatever needs to get done. That can mean a variety of things depending on what's going on. So recently we had a particular incident where a customer called us and basically said, hey, we're seeing some suspicious activity on one of our file shares from a user. We're not really 100% sure what's going on, but it seems really anomalous for the user in question. Anytime we're talking about users and companies' critical data, obviously this is a problem. They want to protect their data. That's part of the Varonis mission, is helping customers protect data. So we jumped on with them and kind of kicked off our investigation, started to collect some triage material, started to analyze some of what we were seeing, in Varonis as a platform. And we traced this activity, the user's activity, we traced it back to a particular IP address and determined that this IP was in the customer's VPN range of IPs, meaning it was assigned to a particular device after it was VPN'd onto the network. So, as a next step, we're going to say, okay, well, we want to know what device is this. So we start pulling some historical data from, their VPN logging. We identify that this particular device, the host name that we're seeing in the logs, is definitely not the user's device in question. It doesn't have the same host name that we expect for this user. So we know already that, this is some type of malicious abuse of their VPN, some type of malicious access to their network, start shutting things down, start resetting passwords as a containment measure, start to, try to kick this threat off the network, assuming, after we had done some additional analysis on potential lateral movement and other activity. So, we came in and as a next step, we talked to them and say, hey, so to get on VPN in your network, is there some type of MFA in place? A lot of companies do certificate pinning on their workstation so that you can't access the VPN unless you have a certificate already in place. That's probably the most common way. If you're at an organization, usually there's something like AnyConnect from Cisco or Palo Alto's Global Protect or something where it's doing some type of host-based security checks. You can't just download the client, the agent, and just connect into the network normally. And they said, yeah, we're doing certificate pinning. This shouldn't be possible. It's not possible for a device that doesn't have the certificate to access the network. Clearly it had happened though. So we start to investigate and figure out, what did this happen? We start working with them to analyze this user's activities because it was all for a particular user that they seemed to have the credentials for. And we determined eventually that their external facing help desk portal did not have MFA enabled of any type. And this is a trade-off, because you want your users, if you say you lose your MFA device, then you can't even contact the help desk. You can't log in, you can't get help unless you maybe call in or something. So it's kind of a business risk trade-off when you make that decision to allow remote access to a help desk without MFA. And they had made this decision, and the user basically had social engineered the help desk to provide them a new certificate, which they were able to then take and install onto their attacking endpoint. And then using the credentials they already had, they were able to VPN into the network and start to do what they did, which was, they started to do some initial reconnaissance, very briefly started doing some kind of exploring of the file shares. We caught them very early on, thankfully. We kind of triage, from a lateral movement perspective, from a command and control perspective, understanding where were what we call the beachhead devices that they had maybe spidered out onto, shutting these down, containment. But really this is kind of an MFA story, because whenever you make that decision to have something external facing but not put MFA on it, even if you think you're protected, there's always going to be that one hole, and that's all the attackers need to find. If they can find one gap in your armor, that can lead to an unfortunate incident, which is kind of exactly what happened here.
Yeah, so one comment on that was, that's pretty big brain. That's as scary. It's a really targeted attack. And then also just that you can never beat social engineering.
Yeah. Just on the social engineering aspect, you've been to DEF CON, so they have these vishing booths, right? DEF CON, if you haven't been there before, they have in events that goes for the whole day sometimes, where they have people who have prepared for a few months in advance. They come up on stage, and it's basically a competition to see who can get the most information out of a target. And they send, they have the teams apply ahead of time in advance, and they do recon and OSINT on these targets. And then they come in and live on stage, they get in a soundproof booth in front of an audience, and they call the target, and they have X amount of time, like I forget how much time, 30 or 45 minutes or something, to get as much information, so they go down their list. They have like 50 phone numbers or whatever. They start calling through all these people, and they just start seeing who can they convince to give them info. They say their IT, they say their help desk. They just start saying whatever they can to get people to give up info. And it's scary how much info people do give up, because, hey, it's IT calling me. Like, why would I, okay, they've given me some real information. I can believe them. They've given me their manager. I can look them up in Teams. They pretend they're someone else. It's scary. I agree.
I feel like if you have the personality of a salesperson and the skills of an OSINT investigator, you can be the most ridiculous social engineer, because you're just not afraid to talk to people at all and just contact them and put the pressure on them. And you're also not afraid to look up all the information that convinces them that you are the person you say you are. And with all the data breaches and stuff that I cover every week on Friday, it's no surprise that most people have enough information out there about them, about companies they've worked with before or relationships they've had with different businesses, that allow somebody to call as supposedly a representative of that business and come off as extremely, extremely convincing. So yeah, these sorts of competitions just show that if you have access to the online information to look up even basic information about a business, you can do a targeted attack that allows you to go to the exact right person with the right information to convince them that it's no big deal, just regularly doing business, and maybe even make an exception to help someone out if they feel like it's someone who's important enough or that they kind of deserve that exception. Like, obviously, I don't know if it was like they social engineered the person into giving them something that they probably weren't supposed to. And in that aspect, like, it's really tricky to be able to know like what's going to happen if a threat actor gets access to external information about an organization that makes the relationships internally. I mean, you could have a data breach that's just emails, between people, but just exposing the contents of those emails, who's involved, what the normal email flow looks like. That might be enough for a threat actor to get in there and take real advantage of an ability to, access a help desk or something like that.
100%. I mean, this is a lot of time, this is how BEC attacks start as well. They want to understand what does normal look like for you so that they can interject themselves into normal, whether that is, a social engineering, a phishing thing that they're trying to do, whether it's kind of, creating a lookalike email and kind of slipping into, some stream of emails. So the address is like one character off. Maybe it's an L instead of an I, or maybe it's, another character in the language that looks very similar to whatever they're trying to mimic. This is definitely a real problem. It's very difficult for humans to be on guard, 24/7. We're not really, it's hard. That's tiring. That's exhausting. So we get all these phishing trainings nonstop, but at the end of the day, people make mistakes. The human is kind of the last line of defense for an organization. So we try to, enterprise security is trying to take as much away from the burden away from a human as possible. Try to automate as much as possible, try to be proactive as much as possible in terms of your detections, your controls, and reduce the risk before it even gets to that human. Because by the time you're relying on a human to be the last, thing that protects your organization from a cyber threat, then it's probably too late, because there's probably a million controls that should have come before that. But it's hard, it's hard, it's expensive. You need the right people, the right tools. It's very time consuming to protect an enterprise.
Yeah, and any mistake or any kind of vulnerability that's out there is a mistake waiting to happen. So I think what's interesting about your story also is that like what they caught was just unusual behavior. The fact the person was going out of scope, the fact they were digging around, this is the behavior of someone who's either looking at exfiltrating information or assessing the value of a breach, basically. Where if this is someone who's doing like an initial access broker, where like they just got in because of some information they got, or because a specialist is working with them who only does this one kind of attack very effectively. I've heard of this. Like, I've heard of very small cybercrime groups that just do business email compromise phishing. It's all they do. And as soon as they get in there and sniff around and see what they have access to, they turn around and sell it to somebody who's better equipped to make a profit on it. And then they move on. They don't go for the big, attention seeking attacks. They just want to make their money and get out, and do the same thing over and over and over, and spam these attacks that rely a little bit of social engineering and a little bit of OSINT to be successful. So it's crazy to me that without the behavior analytics or just being able to detect what is unusual for that person, it would be very hard to know that that was happening.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think if I recall, this particular one was kicked off by an alert actually in Varonis, where it said, hey, they had accessed an anomalous amount of data for this particular user, and they were trying to figure out why and where it came from and the origins of that. To your point on initial access brokers and causing events. Yeah, we've worked other breaches too, where we get in there, they had ransomware or something. So we come in, we help them investigate, we help them kind of trace the attack backwards, understand how it happened. And by the time we get to, the root cause of the attack, oftentimes we observe that, hey, there was malicious access 6 months before your actual ransomware attack. Then there was kind of a pause, and then it picked up again about a month ago before the attack. So there's kind of this 3 to 6 month gap sometimes where it's like an attacker came in, they secured access to your environment. They were probably selling it off at that point, in that duration. And then someone else who wanted to come in and do something additional in the network that the first threat actor didn't want to. That's been the case. We've also just seen straight up 2 or 3 threat actors on the same box simultaneously. So there was an exploitation on a common public facing application a little bit ago. And one of the breaches we worked on this, we saw multiple Bitcoin miners installed on a server that were competing with each other and trying to uninstall one another in their install scripts and deploy scripts. So you could see, there was like a list of other Bitcoin miner names and process names that one of them was trying to, kill and uninstall every time it was deployed. So it's kind of amusing, they're competing with each other for resources.
I have heard of this. I've heard of both Bitcoin miners and then also like threat actors all like getting into the same box and competing with each other. But multiple Bitcoin miners all stepping on each other for dominance is truly like when we hear about breaches, like it's like APTs and Bitcoin miners are the first ones in. Like that's kind of like the like scale for how bad a breach is. If you just start seeing Bitcoin miners popping up in places they shouldn't, you're like, oh my God, this is really bad. Like I remember Log4j, I'm like, why is there Bitcoin miners running in like browsers and all this other stuff? Like that's really how I knew that breach was really big. So the Bitcoin miners stepping on each other is probably something that was bound to happen, but still is just funny to hear about in reality.
Yeah, no, it's funny, not so funny when you are on the client end, because we've seen some of these where they've been on there for a long time. Like we can prove they were on there for months and or years beforehand. Because some of the modern botnets that are out there are just focused on finding vulnerable, exposed servers that they can exploit and automating that exploitation to just give them money, which is usually just exploit to Bitcoin miner. And then once they get out there, they don't really care to do more often, because the more they do, the more attention they draw to themselves, and the more likely it is that they get remediated and the hole gets patched. Like they got their Bitcoin miner on there, they're making money, they're doing it 1,000 times a day or more on various servers and endpoints, so they don't really care. So sometimes it's just that simple and that low profile.
Yeah, I feel like it's like one of the like lowest energy like worms that can spread. It's just like there's not a lot of malicious activity. Things are just a little bit more hot and slow. Maybe they're getting old, but like all the really malicious stuff we're looking for, like file access, whatever, like, nah, I don't need that. I just want coins. Just give me Dogecoin or whatever.
There's Bitcoin miners, and also I see the cat wants to join in, but there's also, we've seen other software being installed where you're basically sharing your internet bandwidth for money. So there are sites and services where you can offer up part of your bandwidth, and people will pay for that bandwidth to basically route traffic through that device. So kind of acting as almost like a proxy, I guess, but people, are paying for specific things. So we've seen some of that type of software installed in certain cases as well.
I'm looking directly at my software developer friend who uses proxies and doesn't ask too many questions about where they come from. Yeah, no, that's definitely something where if you get access to a router or something like that and you are able to sell it, whether or not it's yours, it becomes a pretty profitable business actually to be able to route traffic anonymously, especially through like home addresses and other things that generally indicate a low risk. Like one of the things we talked about is like looking for IP addresses that are suspicious, and like, like an AWS IP for a user logging in versus like a home internet range is gonna be different, you know? So being able to hide that traffic in perhaps a compromised router, or even if you just want to make some money on your own router and don't care, you know, this is something that actually does happen.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's funny that you bring that up, because some of the tools I've made, like I've automated the creation of, like I have a library I use internally for automating the creation of my own proxies when I need a proxy for something on AWS for you know, similar purposes, where it just can spin up and stand it down really easy. It's super useful. We have a tool that I worked on for our team where whenever we get logs that have IPs in them, no matter what type of log it is, even if it's just a text file, we have a tool that will kind of run through the log, pick out all of the public IP addresses, and then enrich them with the current DNS, geolocation, threat intelligence, like indicators, things like this. It's a log I put on my GitHub, so anyone can use it, any team, because we find it very useful for that exact purpose. When we're looking at 10,000 logins, we enrich it like this, and then we search for things that we know shouldn't be on there, like logins from an AWS EC2, for instance, things like this, versus a Time Warner or Spectrum, you know, like a home ISP, because we get the ASN from the enrichment and everything. So it's very useful when we're, you know, kind of doing big scale analysis of data.
So we have a question from the audience, and this is, you know, kind of speculative. This is definitely something that I am not a qualified expert, but I do see a lot of news around this, and I feel like I've got a little bit of an idea of the price range. Like, what would the to anyone best guess what a zero-click, zero-day full access in iOS gets on the gray market? No less than $5 to $10 million. Like for what you can build currently off of that, and who would be interested in purchasing it, and the price point at which they are accustomed to purchasing it, I think that selling something that makes the next generation of like the Predator, you know, like spyware, would easily make you several $million, like because of the existing gray market cyber mercenary infrastructure that exists to sell and promote those sorts of things, which honestly is very depressing, because I don't think that that's anywhere close to the amount that you could get in a bug bounty for the same thing.
I think you're dead on too. I mean, there's even recent news articles you can find if you search this topic, where it's like, yeah, there are companies who are paying for 0 days in a, you know, quote unquote legitimate way potentially, but offering multiple millions of dollars for those types of low click or no click 0 days. So it's yeah, it's if you're a talented researcher, there's money out there to be had, I guess. I don't know how legal. I can't. I don't know how much that works, but it's out there.
Yeah, it's obviously kind of unscrupulous, but I see a lot of this research being done under, or rather these 0 days being sold under the or around the pretext of forensics. So it'll be law enforcement that's the customer. It's like, yeah, okay, like you can glitch this phone and get full access to it, you know, just by sending it a text or just by like powering it up. If you can do that, we'll pay you. And you'll find that the government market is pretty strong when you rebrand these tools as forensics. But the problem is the trickle down. Like, it doesn't stay a secret forever. You're not going to be the only person that finds it. And as soon as somebody else finds it and starts selling it to, you know, unscrupulous parties, you could find yourself the victim of this thing more soon than not. And that's really the problem, is that when you put things like that out into the world and you give it to people who don't care about the human impact when they use it, these sorts of cyber weapons have really big impacts, and they disproportionately affect people. Human rights defenders, journalists, even government people have been hit with this repeatedly. And there's a lot of investigations in Europe right now around these sorts of abuse of mercenary spyware. So yeah, it's a huge topic. It's a huge industry. I am going to RSA specifically to glare at, you know, like cyber mercenary vendors. There's a couple I have on my like stink list, which I cannot say on the stream, but I always go over and ask the questions that make them nervous, and then walk away and like see them have like a group huddle. And it's like, you know, you do what you can to make the world a better place.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, all types of businesses out there.
Yeah, there sure are. So yeah, like I think that obviously, like most of us on the stream feel like making security better by turning these things in and making sure that all of us are protected is kind of the point of ethical hacking. But, you know, there's just regular hacking out there too. So
I mean, even for the purple team exercises that we offer, you know, that the teams at Varonis have occasionally discovered what you might call 0 days or vulnerabilities in security software that we may expect to be, you know, on a client's computer, whether it's an EDR software or antivirus or whatever the case may be. And a lot of people on the team, you know, have worked with these various vendors to disclose them in a responsible and ethical way. So, you know, we're we're finding interesting things, doing the research, but also helping, to improve the security of all our customers, even if it has nothing to do with Varonis, by bringing that to the attention of the vendor, whether it's Microsoft or whoever that may be. I know there's plenty of blogs you can Google with Varonis and CVE for some of the research that other teams have done internally on exposing some interesting things at Microsoft, how different things work, in Windows and things like this. So it's always fun to read about, always fun to see and be a part of.
So I feel like you have a great perspective to answer a question that I get all the time on the stream, which nobody has asked yet, but I feel like it would still be valuable. And that's like, if you are a beginner, if you're like not a full-time researcher where you are in the business of disclosing vulnerabilities, but you find something like a problem with a business, with your school or something like that, this is the point in a lot of hackers' lives where they first get in trouble because they disclose it in a way that either makes people uncomfortable or, it gets reported to the police in worst case. And I've heard so many stories of beginners like trying to make the world a better place by reporting something, but just doing it in a way that kind of falls flat. Do you have any advice for younger researchers or people who are maybe reporting their first vulnerability to do it the correct way and to not get in trouble while doing it? Because that's something I think makes a lot of people nervous before reporting a vulnerability if they do find something, even if it's not like an iOS 0 click 0 day.
Yeah. No, this is funny because this is almost everyone I talk to has some type of let's call it a coming of age story when it comes to cybersecurity and doing something that they probably shouldn't have been doing. And, they just could because it was, whatever. The security was weak. It was lax. It was very obvious, whatever the issue was. They knew they shouldn't have been doing it, but, everybody was young and makes mistakes and does things they shouldn't have. As far as reporting goes, let's say mature companies will often have like a security.txt, like a robots.txt on the root of their webpage that you can go to see where that type of thing should be disclosed. And if it's a mature company, there's probably not concerns. The concern is really when it's an immature company or someone who really doesn't pay attention to security or care much about it. If you approach random Joe Schmo company and say, hey, I found a vulnerability on your website that lets me see all your customers' data, yeah, they're going to have a tendency probably to freak out. I think we've seen this. There was one article, I forget where it was, which state or which city. There was a city that was trying to sue a journalist who had been exposing the fact that their website was inherently flawed and had some big security flaw. And they were trying to sue him into the ground for just talking about this, even though it was, a very public thing. So yeah, I don't know if I have advice so much as, be careful. Sometimes it's not, if it's not part of a bug bounty and you weren't supposed to be playing around there in the first place, then sometimes it's better to just not even mention it, as unfortunate as that is. I don't want to give anyone the wrong advice because I'm not, I've done a little bit about this, but I'm not a professional when it comes to bug hunting or that sort of thing, vulnerability hunting. I'm kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum. So I don't want to lead anyone astray, but just, be careful. Yeah.
James said he was just thinking about that reporter when I asked the question. Yeah. So, I mean, I've had a couple walk-in situations where I'm like, listen, this is just so bad. Like, I have to warn you about this. And usually the businesses end up fixing it. Even if it's something they don't totally understand at first, I'm usually pretty persistent and I never ask for money. I think that's also really important. But you're right. If I feel like I have discovered something and then confirmed to my horror the full extent of how bad it is, but like I maybe shouldn't have been doing that, I will either walk away or ideally I'll reach out to a company that does bug bounty disclosure and I'll ask to see if they can be an intermediary. And if there's no money involved and they're just reaching out as a notification from a company that does this sort of thing all the time, then like BugCrowd or Hackeroni, either one of those could be, or I believe it's pronounced HackerOne. But either one of those could be like something that maybe spares you the hard part of making contact with a skittish business that might misinterpret how you're trying to portray what's going on. Because when we try to underscore how serious these vulnerabilities are, we often scare people, like perhaps intentionally, but maybe not to the degree that they end up being scared. And that can lead to all sorts of problems, like, again, calling the police or having other sorts of reactions when somebody's just trying to get across to them how serious this vulnerability is. And maybe you have skin in the game. Maybe it's your data that's being exposed because it's your school or something like that. Like, I've heard lots of stories about that too. So sometimes it's really hard to balance that, and I feel like it's up to everybody to kind of like assess their own risk level, but it might in certain cases be worth kind of just walking away from the situation if there is too much risk. And I guess my other advice is just try an intermediary that does this for a job.
Yeah, HackerOne and BugGround definitely. Though they're happy, check, maybe they have a program already that's public, or they'll help you out there. That's definitely what I was going to suggest, is an intermediary who is handling this type of thing on a regular basis, so it's a little more credible, I suppose. And because if they don't have a bug bounty program already, the odds that they're going to pay you for something is already pretty slim, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, okay. I feel like we covered a lot of great stuff today, and I have a little bit of Verona stuff to talk about that we're also going to be covering at the booth. So if you're going to be at RSA, you can also check out some of the great Copilot research we've been doing. We did a number of presentations, and I think I even covered, but we haven't like cut it out yet. Some of the research that we just dropped on how like certain commands like allow you to just do ridiculous stuff with Copilot unless you take care of like access and permissions things. I believe the demo we were showing, you like an employee could just ask like a question that was semi-directly related to people's salaries, and it would just populate a table with all of your coworkers' salaries, which depending on your company culture might be totally fine, but other companies might really not like that. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that we've been doing on AI, on generative AI, and if you're interested in checking it out, you should come to the booth at RSAC, which is what they're calling it now. We'll be there, and I'm going to be excited to talk to people. We've got some gift cards to give away for people who answer our quizzes. And yeah, you'll get to see some of the great research we've done, which I'm really excited about getting to talk about. So yeah, if you want to support the stream, you can also go to varonis.com/Kody. That's Kody. It helps everyone know that you appreciate the stream and that you want us to keep going, and we definitely appreciate it. So that's about all the time we have for this week. Joe, you want to come back and do another incident of the month next month?
Yeah, happy to. And if it's not me, we'll get someone else on the team, get some rotating faces in here potentially. We got a pretty large team. We have about 20 people around the world right now handling incidents for customers. So really, it's a lot of fun. We get exposed to a lot of interesting things. I think that's the biggest thing. I came from the enterprise side. And when you're at an enterprise, you don't often get exposed to security breaches because, well, hopefully you're not getting breached on a regular basis. But on our side, we're helping customers who are, every week, every day, we're helping new customers handle breaches. So I love to bring that knowledge to more people. And, we're doing presentations. We got one coming up in Europe at InfoSecurity Europe. We got another one in Australia we're trying to get Black Hat and DEF CON talks in and just kind of do more of these types of talks. Yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get to see some of you in the audience at these upcoming conferences. If you're going to DEF CON, Black Hat, RSAC, let us know. We'll see you at the booth, and maybe you can see some of our researchers. I've met, I think, like 6 researchers. I didn't know we had a team of 20 researchers. Nobody told me this. Okay, that's cool. So I've learned something new. And hopefully we'll have more of these researchers on the stream to talk about kind of the stuff they're interested in. I know hackers, we always have like stuff that we love to do deep dives on. And you and I have now done war driving and a couple other things. So I feel like we can have some other great conversations with people on the team who are interested in some niche and cool hacking stuff. So really looking forward to it.
Yeah. And that's just our forensics and an IR side, honestly, our escalation, senior people in those areas, because we have the whole, there is a whole other research team. But yeah, we'll have to get some more faces in here.
Cool. Well, my camera on cue just died. Nice. This is a little bit of an experiment to see also about the new Canon R50. Let me know how you liked it prior to it dying. But with that cue, that's going to be it for today. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye, everyone.